Hello again, it's Jamie Lynn from Holy Mindful, and this is the second part of a two-part video series on compassion resilience. So in the first part, I just left off talking about the 3 zones of activation for practicing compassion: comfort, challenge, overwhelmed. And I had asked how you know when you become overwhelmed and you have too much emotional pain in order to stay connected with somebody with whom you're trying to practice compassion. So I'd like to explore a little bit more about that. First, I'd like to talk about the fact that becoming overwhelmed when there's too much pain is really human. Sometimes we think that we're supposed to be able to withstand any amount of pain and stay connected, and we try to be warriors in this compassion field. And what can happen with that is if our nervous system's activated and our nervous system is in kind of a fight, flee, or freeze response, and we stay connected, over time that can lead to what they oftentimes call compassion fatigue. It just ends up being too much for our nervous system to take on. And so staying in this overwhelm area for too long can be difficult on our nervous system. And so in the second section of the video, I'm going to suggest that one option when you notice that you become overwhelmed is actually to come home to comfort. Oftentimes we want to move from overwhelmed into challenge, but if our nervous system's activated, it's oftentimes the skillful thing to do to come back to our comfort zone, kind of soothe ourselves with a little bit of self-compassion, and then once we become soothed, move back out to that zone of challenge, where again we can resonate with some pain and yet also have that sense of warmth and connection. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the comfort zone of practicing compassion, and that can oftentimes involve self-compassion. And so I'm going to use a definition by Kristen Neff for self-compassion, which talks about 3 different components. The first one is a sense of mindfulness or awareness, and that's already happened. If you've noticed that you're having a conversation, you become overwhelmed, that awareness, oh, I've become overwhelmed. That's mindfulness, right? The second component is a sense of common humanity or connectedness, remembering that being overwhelmed is a completely normal human experience. It happens when we're resonating with too much pain. And then the third component is to remember to ask ourselves, what would feel like kindness? What do we need? So talking about this practically, there's many ways. I've been studying self-compassion for years, and there's many ways to practice self-compassion. But in an example like this, if I'm having a conversation with somebody I've resonated with a little bit more pain than my system can handle, I might back up. And even I might kind of still look like I'm engaged in the conversation, or I might take a little break, but I'm going to acknowledge to myself, wow, I'm resonating with a little bit too much pain here. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Maybe I'll feel my feet, use some mindfulness tools. Maybe I'll take a few breaths. I might even practice a little bit of compassionate touch, right? Placing my hand on my heart. But for a moment, I'm going to turn inward, and I'm going to tend to my own emotions so that I can calm my nervous system, and I can again then move out to challenge. And oftentimes people think that to focus on themselves when somebody else is in distress is really selfish. Well, in reality, focusing on ourselves when we've taken on too much emotional resonance can be a way to kind of put our own oxygen mask on first, if you will, so that we can again connect. And so I'm going to ask you to consider now, what feels like comfort to you? So when you're in a situation where there's emotional distress and you notice you've become overwhelmed, what are those things that can get you back to the comfort zone? And especially those things that you can do on the spot, right? Like feeling your breathing, a little bit of compassionate touch, and maybe right now you're just realizing, I'd like to learn more self-compassion because I'm not really sure what can soothe me on the spot. And sometimes, again, we also have to notice that I become overwhelmed, we stay connected, and we need to tend to ourselves later. Have a conversation with someone else to debrief, or go for a walk, or do something that's a little bit bigger than a few breaths to really get our systems back in balance and again be able to practice compassion with resilience.